"Hey, work boots. You with the marina?" Sutton didn't look up from the outboard motor he was adjusting. He just kept his hands where they were, slow and deliberate, the way a man does when he's decided not to let something bother him even though it already has. "Excuse me," he said finally. The woman standing on the dock wore a blazer, the color of old cream and heels, that had no business being near salt water. She had two men behind her in dark jackets, and a folder tucked under her arm like she was about to table a motion at a board meeting, which, it turned out, was more or less exactly what she was doing. "I'm looking for the property manager," she said. "Someone told me to find a man in work boots by the dry dock." "So," she gestured at him with two fingers. "Is that you?" Sutton set down the wrench. He wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. He looked at the woman, really looked, and thought of something his father used to say out on Georgian Bay when the weather turned fast. "Some people make a lot of noise because they've never had to be still." "I'm not the property manager," Sutton said. "Then who are you?" "The owner." She blinked, just once, then recovered. "Right, well." She extended her hand. "Celeste Varro, Development Acquisitions, Varro Capital. We've been looking at this stretch of the North Channel for a while now. The marina, the boat storage, the heritage boathouse. All of it." Sutton shook her hand. His grip was steady. Hers was firm in the way of someone who'd been trained to make it so. "And," he said, "and we'd like to talk about buying it." The marina had belonged to the Crail family for 51 years. Sutton's grandfather, Edmund Crail, had built the first dock with salvaged cedar planks and a borrowed post driver in 1973 on a piece of Canadian Shield shoreline that everyone else had overlooked because the rock made it hard to develop. Edmund hadn't cared about developing it. He'd cared about boats. He'd cared about the way fog sat on the water at 6 in the morning, and the sound of a good engine turning over, and the particular kind of quiet you only find when you're surrounded by water and spruce and nothing else. He'd passed it to Sutton's mother. She'd kept it running through 2 recessions and 1 ice storm that took out the main boathouse. She'd passed it to Sutton when she died, 4 years ago, along with a letter she'd written by hand on the back of a fuel invoice. The only paper she could find, she said, that told him to hold on to it no matter who came asking. Sutton had read that letter so many times the folds had gone soft. He was 39 years old. He had a daughter named Wren, 7, gap-toothed, absolutely fearless around water in a way that made him proud and terrified in equal measure. He drove a 2009 Ford pickup that had a crack across the dashboard and fishing line tangled somewhere in the heating vent. He wore the same 3 flannels on rotation and owned more waders than dress shirts. He did not, from the outside, look like a man who owned anything worth fighting over. That was, he had come to understand, a significant miscalculation on people's part. Celeste Varro was 36. She had grown up in Toronto, studied business at Western, spent 8 years working her way up through a commercial real estate firm before her uncle brought her into Varro Capital and handed her the acquisitions file for Northern Ontario. Waterfront properties, heritage sites, anything with potential that hadn't yet realized it was valuable. She was good at her job. She was thorough, and she was direct, and she did not particularly enjoy the parts of the work that required her to be charming to people who didn't want to sell. But she did those parts anyway, because that was the job, and Celeste Varro had never been someone who stopped it hard. She had looked at the Crail Marina file for 3 weeks before flying up to Sudbury and driving out to the North Channel. She'd looked at the satellite images, the municipal assessment records, the heritage designation documents, the shoreline footage her assistant had pulled from a boating forum in 2021. She had run the numbers 6 different ways. What she had not done, she would later admit to herself, was think very carefully about who she was walking onto the dock to talk to. She had assumed, and this was the word she kept coming back to, afterward, with something close to embarrassment, she had assumed she was dealing with someone who was barely keeping it together, someone who would be relieved to hear an offer, someone in over their head. The man in the work boots had not looked like he was in over his head. He had looked like the dock was part of his body. Like the water behind him was something he'd grown up breathing. She'd filed that away and kept talking anyway. "We're not interested in selling," Sutton said. He said it the same way he might have said the weather looks like rain, not unkindly, just factually. Celeste opened the folder. "I understand that's your initial position, but I'd encourage you to look at the offer before." "It's not an initial position," Sutton said. It's just the position. One of the men behind Celeste shifted his weight. She didn't look at him. Mr. Crail, she said, the North Channel is going to change in the next 10 years. You have to know that. The provincial corridor expansion, the new access road coming through Espanola. This area is going to see development whether individual property holders choose to participate or not. We're giving you the opportunity to be part of that on your own terms. My terms, Sutton said, are that I keep the marina. Celeste looked at him steadily. The offer is $4.2 million. The water moved. Somewhere down the dock, a rope creaked against a cleat. A kingfisher landed on a post 20 feet away, looked at both of them with one eye, and left. No, Sutton said. Wren was sitting on the stern of a 22-foot Grady White when Sutton walked back up the dock. She was reading a library book with a flashlight, even though it was 2 in the afternoon, because she had recently decided that flashlights were more interesting than natural light. And Sutton had not yet found a reason to argue with this. Who was the lady? Wren asked without looking up. Someone from the city. What did she want? To buy the marina. Wren looked up then. Our marina? Yeah. She considered this with the seriousness that 7-year-olds reserve for things that actually matter. What did you say? I said no. She nodded once, apparently satisfied, and went back to her book. Sutton stood there for a moment, looking at her. The top of her dark head, the flashlight making a yellow circle on the page, the lake, behind her going silver in the afternoon light, and felt the particular kind of love that lives in the chest like a weight you'd choose every time. His mother had taken him out on that same dock when he was not much older than Wren. She'd pointed at the water and said, "This doesn't belong to us. We belong to it." He'd thought she was being poetic. It had taken him 20 years to understand she was being precise. Celeste drove back to Sudbury that evening and sat in her hotel room with the file open on the table and the window showing a sky going purple over the tree line. She'd made 12 acquisitions in the last 3 years. She'd never been told no on the first visit that actually stuck. She called her assistant. Pull everything on Edmund Crail, the grandfather. Whatever's in the municipal archives, the land registry, the harbor authority records. I want to know what else he owned. Sure, what are we looking for? I don't know yet, Celeste said. That's why I'm asking. She sat with the folder a while longer after she hung up. She thought about the way Sutton had said no, not angry, not defensive, just level. Like someone who had already decided, a long time ago, that this moment would come and had been waiting for it without fear. It bothered her more than it should have. The next morning, she went back. She hadn't planned to. She'd told herself she was driving out to look at the access road survey points, which was technically true, but she found herself pulling into the marina gravel lot at 8:30 when the mist was still sitting on the water and the place had a quality to it. Hushed. Almost sacred, that she hadn't expected. Sutton was in the Heritage Boathouse. The doors were open and she could hear him before she saw him, the sound of a hand plane moving along wood, slow and even. She stopped in the doorway. Inside, the boathouse was full of morning light coming through 2 high windows. A wooden boat, 20 feet long maybe, with a shape that belonged to another era, sat on sawhorses in the center of the space. The hull had been partially stripped and was being rebuilt plank by plank. The smell of cedar and linseed oil was strong enough to feel like something physical. Sutton heard her and stopped. He looked over his shoulder. You came back, he said. Not surprised, not unwelcoming. Just noting it. I did. Celeste looked at the boat. What is this? 1938 Ditchburn runabout. My grandfather found her sunk in 8 feet of water off the French River. Spent 4 years bringing her back. He set down the plane. Then she sat for 30 years and started going again. I've been working on her since my mother passed. Celeste walked closer. She ran one hand along the hull without thinking, the way you do when something is beautiful and real. The wood was warm under her palm. How long will it take? She said. As long as it takes. He picked up the plane again. You want coffee? She almost said no. Professional instinct, don't get comfortable. Don't let the conversation become something other than a negotiation. But the boathouse was quiet and the light was something else and she was tired of being only professional. Sure, she said. They drank coffee on the dock. Sutton in his work boots. Celeste with her blazer folded over her arm because it was warmer than she'd expected. Wren appeared from somewhere, assessed Celeste with the frank appraisal of a child who has not yet learned to pretend, and asked her why her shoes had no grip. They're not really made for docks, Celeste admitted. Dad has extra rubber boots in the shed. Wren offered. They're too big, probably. Wren, Sutton said. I'm just saying. Celeste laughed. It surprised her. The laugh came out genuine, loose, before she could shape it into something more controlled. Wren disappeared again. Sutton watched her go with a look on his face that Celeste filed away without meaning to. The particular exhausted devotion of a parent, who is the only one, who has been the only one for long enough that they've stopped thinking about it and just do it, day after day, because what else do you do? Her mother? Celeste asked and then caught herself. Sorry. That's not. 4 years ago, Sutton said. Same year I lost my mother. It was a bad year. He said it simply, the way people do when grief has been lived with long enough to become part of the furniture. Her name was Nadia. She and my mother, actually. He stopped. It was a bad year. Celeste didn't say I'm sorry because it had been 4 years and he hadn't said it to get sympathy. She said, Does Wren remember her? Some. She has her laugh. His eyes stayed on the water. And her stubbornness. That one she definitely inherited. Celeste's assistant called at noon with the land registry results. She was sitting in her car in the marina lot, eating a gas station sandwich, when the call came through. She put it on speaker. Okay, so, her assistant said Edmund Crail. He bought the marina parcel in 1973, we knew that. But there's more. He also bought a second parcel in 1979. Timber and Shoreline, runs east from the marina boundary for about 11 kilometers along the North Channel. Celeste stopped eating. How large? The sound of papers. The full parcel is assessed at. Okay, so current market it's. A pause. Celeste, this is a big number, tell me. With the shoreline footage, the timber rights and the freshwater access? Conservatively, $140 million. Maybe more, depending on how the corridor development affects access. Celeste sat very still. She thought about the cracked dashboard on the Ford pickup in the lot, the 3 flannels, the hand plane moving along cedar in a boathouse lit by 2 high windows. The way Sutton had said no, not angry, not defensive, just level. She thought about what she had assumed when she walked onto that dock. Is it the same registered owner, she said. Sutton Edmund Crail, yeah. She sat there a while after she hung up. Outside the window she could see the docks. Sutton was out there with Wren pointing at something in the water. The kid leaned over the rail to look, completely unafraid. Celeste thought about the folder she'd brought, the $4.2 million offer that she had laid on the table, like she was doing him a favor. She thought about the word Osum. She went back to the boathouse. Sutton was inside, back at the ditch burn. He didn't look up when she came in. The parcel east of the marina, she said, 11 kilometers of North Channel shoreline. He kept working. The plane moved along the plank, slow and even. A curl of cedar fell to the floor. What about it? He said. I didn't know it was yours. I didn't tell you. He set down the plane and looked at her then, and there was something in his face that wasn't quite satisfaction. More like the look of someone who had been patient for a long time and was simply watching the patience prove itself out. Nobody does, usually. The records are public, but nobody checks. They see the marina, they see the truck, they see the boots. He looked down at his hands. They assume. Celeste was quiet for a moment. She was good at being honest with herself when she made herself do it, and she made herself do it now. I assumed, she said. Yeah, I came here thinking I was doing you a favor. Yeah, she let that sit. It deserved to sit. The offer was insulting, she said. I didn't mean it that way. But it was. Sutton picked up the plane again. He looked at the hull. My grandfather found this boat in 8 feet of water, he said again. The same words as the morning, but slower this time. People had written her off. Figured she was too far gone to be worth anything. He spent 4 years on her because he knew what she was. He ran one hand along the cedar. Some things don't announce themselves. Soleil stood in the light from the high windows, the smell of cedar and linseed oil, the water outside going quiet. Why do you keep it? She said. The east parcel. You could sell just that and you'd never have to worry about anything. Sutton was quiet for a moment. Then, come here. He took her to a photograph on the boathouse wall tucked into the corner so modest you'd miss it if you weren't looking. It was black and white, badly lit, showing 2 people on a dock. A man in a canvas jacket, a woman with her hair loose. They were looking at the water, not the camera. That's Edmund, Sutton said. And my grandmother, Bea, 1977. The east parcel. There's a stretch of river in there, runs through a stand of old white pine. Bea used to take my mother out there every spring to watch the osprey nest. She called it the listening place. He was quiet for a moment. My mother took me. I took Ren for the first time when she was 4, 3 months after Nadia died. Celeste looked at the photograph, the two figures looking at the water, the stillness of it. I've been looking at the corridor expansion numbers for 6 months, she said, and her voice was different now, quieter, less the shape of a presentation. The access road through Espanola, the development projections. I've been seeing all of this as opportunity. She paused. I don't think I looked at what I'd be replacing. Sutton said nothing. He didn't need to. It was Ren who made Celeste stay for dinner, in the way of children who have not yet learned that inviting people to things requires permission. She simply appeared at the boathouse door at 5:30 and announced that her dad was making pasta, and there was too much of it, which Sutton confirmed with a look that said he knew better than to argue. They ate at a picnic table on the dock, as the light went gold, and then rose, and then finally gray. Ren talked at length about Osprey, about why flashlights were superior to sunlight for reading, about a crack she'd found in the keel of the ditchburn that her dad hadn't seen yet, and was very serious about. Sutton listened to all of it with the same patience he brought to the boat work. At some point Celeste stopped thinking about the folder in her car. At some point she stopped thinking about the corridor expansion, the access road, the shoreline footage numbers. She thought about what her job actually was, what she'd told herself it was for 8 years. Finding value that hasn't been recognized yet. She'd thought of that as a financial skill, sitting on a dock on the North Channel, watching a 7-year-old eat pasta with complete confidence and zero table manners. She thought that maybe she'd been applying it to the wrong things. What would you do with it? Sutton asked. They were the only ones left at the table. Ren had gone in. The lake was black now, and the first stars were doing their slow arrival overhead. If you bought it, the East Parcel. Celeste thought about the proposal she'd drafted, boutique eco-resort, sustainable development. The language had been very careful, very responsible sounding. Resort, she said. 12 cabins, a main lodge, heritage boathouse experience for guests. She paused. It looks good in a presentation. Does it look like that? He gestured eastward, toward the darkness where 11 kilometers of shoreline and old pine and osprey nests sat quiet in the Canadian night. She was honest. No, my grandfather didn't buy it to sell it, Sutton said. He didn't buy it because it was worth something. He bought it because he wanted Bea to have a place that would still be there, that wouldn't get turned into something. He looked at the water. That's what he left. Not the money. The fact that it's still there. Celeste thought about her own grandfather, who had built Varo Capital from a commercial leasing office in Etobicoke, and told her, the summer before he died, that the most important thing in business was to know the difference between what could be replaced and what couldn't. She had thought at the time that he was talking about assets. She was not sure anymore that he had been. The next morning she called her uncle. The Crail file, she said. I'm recommending we close it. A pause. Close it. Walk away. The property isn't available and it's not going to be. Celeste, the East Parcel alone. I know what the East Parcel is worth. She was standing on the gravel lot, looking at the lake. The mist was back, sitting low on the water, the way it did every morning here. I also know what it is. Those aren't the same number. Her uncle was quiet for a moment. He'd built the company. He understood things that took time. All right, he said. She stayed on the line a moment after he hung up, looking at the mist. Then she went to find Sutton. He was in the boathouse. Of course he was. The plane was moving along the ditchburn's hull, slow and even, cedar curling to the floor. I called my uncle, she said. We're closing the file. Sutton stopped. He looked at her over his shoulder. Why, he said. It was a real question. He wasn't being modest or careful. He genuinely wanted to know. Celeste leaned against the doorframe. Outside, the lake was doing what it did, moving, breathing, catching light that was just starting to find the gaps in the cloud. Because my job is supposed to be finding value that hasn't been recognized, she said. And I came up here thinking that meant something specific. A number, a potential. She looked at the boat on the sawhorses, the photograph on the wall, the high windows full of morning. I think the value here is exactly what you're doing, keeping it what it is. That's not nothing. She paused. That's actually quite hard. Sutton looked at her for a moment, then he turned back to the boat. You should come back in August, he said. Osprey are still on the nest. Ren's been trying to get someone to care about it for 3 months. Celeste laughed. That loose, genuine laugh again. I'll think about it, she said. So, she did come back in August. She came with different shoes. Ren noticed immediately, and said, "Those have grip," with the satisfaction of someone whose advice has been taken seriously. Sutton gave Celeste the same quiet look he had on the first day. Watchful, level, giving nothing away, and then handed her a coffee and led her down the east trail to the listening place. The white pines were old enough to make you feel small in the good way. The river moved slow and brown between mossy banks. High up, in a nest that looked like a small shipwreck at the top of a dead spruce, two osprey moved against a sky that was the particular blue that only happens in August in northern Ontario, so clear it almost hurts. Ren stood between them. She pointed up at the nest with a proprietary pride, the way children do when they've decided something belongs to them by virtue of caring about it most. She reached up and took Sutton's hand without looking. Then, after a moment, she reached up and took Celeste's hand too. The osprey made one long, low call across the river. The pines moved. The water ran on. Sutton looked at Celeste over the top of Ren's head and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything that needed saying. The listening place had earned its name, and some things, as Edmund Crale had understood long before any of them, are kept exactly by knowing when to be still.